everybody. Thanks for joining us here today. This is Nicole with Topaz, and I'm super excited to welcome Joel Wolfson so he can present his travel through time with Topaz. Hey, Joel.
Hey there, Nicole. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to show you some of the things you can do with the newly released texture effects. I'm going to work in a few others, a few other favorite plugins too that kind of fit into the workflow. Texture Effects is a plugin, but it also works as a standalone program, and it's way cool. From the moment I started using the pre-release versions, I couldn't keep up with all the creative ideas I could pursue. So I'm calling the theme for today Travel Through Time because Texture Effects allowed me to create all kinds of looks, vintage, like late 19th century, posterized, Andy Warhol kind of stuff, Polaroid transfers, just about anything I could dream up. And the best way to get a handle on this is just to kind of show you the program in action with some examples that I picked out for today. Wish I had time for more of them, but I'll do what I can do. And for those of you that haven't taken one of my webinars before, I just wanted to mention real quick that I have a number of educational resources, such as my blog, newsletter, archives of these webinars, tips and techniques, etc. And the best way to make use of those is to sign up for my email list. Nicole will provide my website and blog at the end, so you can sign up on either one of those. And also keep an eye on Topaz's Pro Insights on their website. I submit articles there along with several other pros that have lots of great tips and techniques to share. So if you have seen my webinars before, taken one of my workshops, you know that Lightroom is my main hub, sort of my photo hub or photo life hub, whatever you want to call it. And that's where I work out of, and then I'll be jumping into Photoshop and the various plugins from there. So along with our theme of going through time, I'm going to start at sort of late 18th century, early 19th century when images were made as ambrotypes or tintypes. And this is the image I'm going to start with. And where I'm going to end up is right here where we have kind of a look of an ambrotype that's maybe old and worn and has seen better days, but has that vintage look, that ambrotype look. Now, this image right here, I originally conceived as a black and white. This is hay harvest in Tuscany, and I shot this while I was scouting for the Villages of Tuscany workshop that I conduct there. And I like the kind of timeless feel when it's a black and white, and I just want to take it a step further and show you how I use both black and white effects and texture effects to get our final look. So from Lightroom, those of you that haven't seen it, it's a lot like the Topaz plugins. There are collections on the left when I'm in the library mode, and then information over here, various things about the image on the right. And there's different modules. I'm not going to really spend any time on this, but just to kind of let you know where I'm coming from. So the best way to get into this is you can either right-click on the image itself. If you're a menu person, you can go to the upper left here to Photo, go to Edit In, and I'm going to start out in Photoshop. My little rule of thumb is if I'm going to be using more than one effect or more than one plugin, then I want to be able to use layers, and Photoshop affords me the luxury of layers. So I am going to be using more than one plugin, and I'm definitely going to want to be able to do that in layers. So I have Photoshop set up with my tools on the left, and my layers are in the lower right here. I made my cursor a little bigger so you can see it. And the very first thing I always do is take my main image, which comes in as the background image. I'll drag and drop it onto the dog ear icon. That's a way to duplicate it. There are many ways to duplicate it in Photoshop. The other way is Command or Control J, and then I immediately relabel it. So I'm going to call this black and white effects. That way, if I ever go back to this layered image, I can see what I did with each layer, and if I decide to change it or whatever, I can do that. So the next thing I can do is go to up to the top to the Filter menu, click on Filter, down to Topaz Labs, and the first thing I want to do is go into black and white effects. Black and white effects is an awesome way to convert black and white. It's definitely my go-to program for black and whites. And I'll just give you a quick overview of the interface. So we've launched into black and white effects here. And the layout of this is very similar to a lot of the Topaz plugins. When we go to texture effects, I'll show you the layout of that too. Now over on the left, a lot like Lightroom, there are collections, and then in those collections are a number of presets. So we have collections of various presets. Now it comes up as a default to the neutral grayscale, and that's not a bad starting point. Now you can look at the different presets and see what you like. So for instance, I'm in the traditional collection right here. This little grid icon is a browse mode, and I can click on that and it'll give me all different variations within that collection. And of course you can choose other collections and decide what you want to do. The one that I often start with that works really well is the classic, which is right here. So I'll click on that and you can see it's applied it. Now of course you can also just go through the list on the left and you can click on these and apply other presets too. But I'm gonna start with the classic, and that's, I'd say I'm just about there. Now what I can do is make some tweaks on the right. On the right hand side of this layout are all my tools. These colored buttons up here are just sort of a quick way to get to various effects, and if you hover over it, it'll tell you. So these are all filters. You can apply filters. These are all toning, contrast, etc. I sometimes use those. The ones I use the most are the filters, but the crux of this program is in these tools over on the right, and the most important one is adaptive exposure. Now I've clicked on the classic preset, so it's already made some settings for me in the adaptive exposure. I just want to explain this really quickly because I think adaptive exposure is super important, and it's something only Topaz has. I haven't really seen anything like this in other plugins. It's also in Adjust, by the way, which is one of my all-time favorite Topaz plugins. That has adaptive exposure as well. I'm just going to flip back here really quick to show you the color image. What I want you to notice about this color image is that it's a little bit overcooked. It's a little bit more saturated and a little bit contrastier than I would do a color image. But as I mentioned, I can see this as a black and white. And one of my little tips, if you read my black and white tips, is I start with a color image and I sort of make it a tiny bit gaudy before I go into changing it to black and white. So back in black and white effects here, you see just by hitting the classic, I've already got a pretty good conversion. So what the adaptive exposure does is it's a good name because it adaptively adjusts exposure with highlights and shadows so you don't lose, you're not sacrificing one or the other. I'm opening the basic exposure tab here just to show you with a typical exposure slider. If I try to bring up dark areas, then my highlights get blown out. Likewise, if I go down this way to try to get detail and highlights, then my dark areas get blocked up. So that's the beauty of adaptive exposure. And it works in conjunction with regions. If you think of regions like a sort of a grid or a piece of graph paper that's invisibly overlaid on the image, and then the adaptive exposure applies to each of those regions, and then it combines them. So the way I determine this is the more little pockets of differing exposure I have, the more the number of regions I'll use. So if I bring this down to 1, it's looking at the picture as one whole piece, and the more I bring it over to the right, it divides it up, and it's just going to make it a little smoother. Now if you overdo it, you're going to get some funky effects and maybe some halos and things like that, but what I found is that oftentimes what I'll end up with is that the number on the regions will be somewhat close to what I have on the adaptive exposure. I can't say that's a hard and fast rule, but it might give you a little guideline, and the best thing to do is just play around with this. So if you take it to one extreme or another, you can see what it does, and with no adaptive exposure it's kind of flat looking. But you notice as I'm increasing exposure through adaptive exposure, I'm not losing highlights or shadows, and that's really the beauty of this thing. So the only other thing I might want to do here is bring out the sky and the clouds a little bit, and I can do that with a yellow filter. So I'm going to go up to the top here and just use the quick button to apply the yellow filter. And you can see it automatically opens the color filter dialog down here below. Now I think that's a bit overdone, but I have a strength slider So I can just bring that down to a more reasonable level. And I like that right there. I think that looks great. So this will be our starting point. I'm going to click OK, and that will bring us back to Photoshop here. And my sky looks a little bit dark, but I think this will work. So there's where we started before black and white effects, and that's with black and white effects. So the next thing I want to do is make a duplicate of this layer. I'm going to do that by using Command J, would be Control J on a PC, and I'm going to name this Texture Effects. Whoops, if I can spell. So again, just so I know what I did. So I'm starting with a black and white. Now I'm going to go up to Filter, down to Topaz Labs. These are in alphabetical order, so Texture Effects will be on the bottom. And this opens up into Texture Effects. Now, I want to spend a couple minutes just to show you the layout of Texture Effects. If you've used Impression or Glow, which are more recent plugins from Topaz, they have, this will look very familiar. So I'm going to click on this arrow to get us back to where the presets are showing, and this is more or less how it'll probably come up the first time you use it. And the way the interface is very simple and easy and intuitive. So over on the right, I've got all my presets, and you can see if I just click on one, it'll convert the photo to that preset. And you notice at the very top it says featured, so that's what it defaults to, but I can look at all different categories of effects here. So including my effects, so there's some that I've saved off, and you can just go to whatever, you know, whatever sort of style that you want with this menu here. Now, I'll go back up to the featured, and I'm going to click on the browse menu because I want to show you some other. So it's that same little grid that you just saw in black and white effects that gives you the browse mode. And I want to explain some of this stuff because Topaz has done something really cool here. So if you notice under both, this menu here, what that means is it says local and community in both. Now this is something new, and what's important here is, or what's really cool anyway, is the community thing. Let me explain that in just a second. So if I click on local, that's going to show me the nearly 300 effects that they, or sorry, there's, and I think there's over 100 total effects, and there's close to 300 textures that come with this thing. It's pretty amazing. The textures, by the way, are high resolution, so they match, you know, they'll match a 24 megapixel camera, which is a pretty typical high-end DSLR these days. And so that's really cool because they're high res. You don't even have to scan your own. I think the folks over at Topaz have done a really good job of doing that. So local is what comes with it. That's what's on my system locally. Community, Topaz has a thing called Topaz Community where you can upload and download presets. So when I do this one, you'll notice that some of these, like let's say I want to use Vintage at Night here, there's a little download button. I haven't downloaded this effect yet. All I have to do is click on it and it downloads it. I'll just point out over in the upper left here, there's a log out button. If I were not logged in, you can log in there, and you can, if you already have a Topaz login, you can use that. Otherwise, it's real easy to set one up. So now I have this this Vintage at Night. I can click on different ones here, and I'll see the effect over on the left in the preview. And I can even favorite this one. That's what the little heart is if I want to make it a favorite, or I can click on this symbol right here, which will bring me back into the settings. So I want to show you, so up here if I want to see both local and community, that's what the both thing was that it came up to. And then I can further filter it to different categories of effects or the different tags. So when you save an effect or someone else saves an effect and makes it available on the community, they can tag it with different categories here like black and white, nature, whatever, all these different things. So this is a way you can filter them, or you can just do a search. So maybe I only want, let me try black and white. Maybe I only want to look for effects with black and white. So anybody who's put a tag on this with black and white, this is what comes up. So there's all different kinds of ways you can look at these and find effects that you want. And the really cool part is you can share them out in the community. So as soon as you upload it, it's available to anybody that goes on the Topaz community, and likewise, you have available all that stuff. So I'm going to go back to the main interface here, and I'm going to turn this is the one that I want to turn into an ambrotype. So I'll show you if I go to my effects, and here's ambrotype aged and worn by Joel Wolfson. You can see this little share to the community symbol. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to share this with you guys. I'll click on it right now. So now if any of you are out there logged into Texture Effects, you can use it right now. And this is where we're going, but I'm gonna click new because I want to show you how I got there and just show you all the cool things you can do in this program. So the first thing I'm going to do with this is add a texture, because I'm going for kind of that an older look, or a worn look, so to speak. And you notice that all these textures come up, and as I hover over them, it shows me each of those textures. So this is a quick way to kind of decide what you want. And I'm looking for something that isn't bad. Now, I should mention here, I'm ignoring color right now, because like this one might give me kind of an old worn look, like actually something that maybe got wet. I don't really want that look. But I'm ignoring the color because I can change that. So this has a little color to it, but I like this look, so I'm going to choose that one. And I'll show you a few more things you can do within this setting. First of all, I'm going to collapse this layer just to show you that there are layers. So when I did add adjustment, it added a texture layer, and you can choose from all these different types of layers here. So I put in one called texture. The little triangle symbol reveals all the sliders and controls and all the different things I can do within this layer. And so I'm going to show you some of those things. Now, one thing, I'm going to jump down here to the blending mode, because this is just like the blending mode in Photoshop. And the way this is applying, it's a little too much. It's kind of washing out the image a bit. So I'm guessing that if I change my blending mode, that it might help me get what I want out of this. So as I go over these, as I hover over them, it shows you the different ones. And it's probably going to be somewhere in the overlay, soft, hard light, somewhere in here that I'm going to want to use it. Soft light is a little too subtle, overlay is a little too much. So I'm just going to start with one of them. I'll do soft light, and I can always adjust it from there, and I will show you how I do that. So I've changed my blending mode to the way I want it. Now I can play around with opacity and detail to get more or less texture out of it. So if I bring up the opacity, I think I'll bring it up all the way. You can see that texture is showing through. Now this particular texture effect, as you saw from the little thumbnail, and you can see in the image, it's got some color to it. I don't necessarily want that color, so I'm going to bring the saturation down, because I'm just looking for the texture in this. Okay, so now I've got a texture that gives me some of that worn look. That's pretty good the way it is. I'm going to close this. I'm going to add another adjustment, and this time I'm going to do a border. Now, what I'm looking for, what I have in mind, is sort of a vignette. So I could do a vignette. I have a choice here. The reason I'm going to use border is because the borders also have various other characteristics, and the main thing I'm looking for is a border that's going to give me some kind of texture as well to kind of go along with that aged and worn look. So I'm just going to kind of look through here and try some different ones. And again, I'm probably going to sort of ignore, oh, that's pretty good right there. So I like this. It definitely gives it an aged and worn look, while at the same time it gives it a vignette. Now, if at any time you want to see the effect before and after, you can just go to the top of the filter, top of the layer here, and click the eyeball, just like you might do in Photoshop. So there's all the effects I have above it, and I'm just selectively turning on and off the borders. So I'm going to adjust this a little more, and I'll show you some more things you can do to adjust it. One thing is you can change the size. So on a border, as I increase the size, that's going to push the border more to the edges just because I'm making it larger. So I'm going to push that out a bit, and I might go back here and just kind of double check that's no border, that's with a border, because I'm just looking for mostly a vignette but with a little texture. And I can remember before I said you can play around with opacity and detail. So the opacity is up all the way already, but I can start increasing the detail here, and you see it's making that, it's kind of subtle. If I do it all the way you can see, but anyway, it's making that border a little more prevalent. I'll go probably about halfway here. And then saturation is going to control the amount of color that's in that border. So if I bring it all the way up, you can see I'm getting a lot of color in the border, and there's even stuff kind of going on in the middle. But as I bring the saturation down, then I'm mostly just left with the texture, which is kind of what I want. So subtle thing here, I'm going to click on it. So there's without the border, and there's with the border. So I like that. And I'm getting close to done here, but you remember my original one, I wanted kind of a brownish or sepia look to it. So in my next adjustment, again, I have a choice. I can go to split tone, which makes does beautiful toning. You can control the highlights and the shadows, just like you can in a lot of the other Topaz plugins and even things like Lightroom. But I don't want I don't want a traditional looking sepia tone. So I'm going to use the color overlay instead, which is just kind of what it sounds like. It puts sort of color over the whole thing. And the reason is, if you look at an ambrotype or even like a tintype, it has this kind of silvery brownish reflective look, and that's kind of what I'm going for. So I click on this, I get my color selector. I've already got a brown in here, so I'm going to use that. But if you don't have that, you have the color wheel here, and you can select any color, and you can also select how dark or light it is. So I'm going to use that. And the only thing I might want to do here is, it's a little bit heavy, so I'm going to take the opacity down on it a bit. So I think that looks pretty good, and like I say, instead of a traditional toning where I'm dealing with the highlights and shadows, I kind of like this overall look. I think it sort of mimics that that ambrotype look. So I'm pretty good here. Now the main thing I just want to do is give it that kind of worn over time look. So I'm going to add some scratches to this. And in this layer, I can do dust and scratches. I'm going to do that. And I'll show you something else in here. There's these submenus, and I didn't show you this before, but I can show you. You can pick, again, sort of subcategories of this. So this is dust and scratches layer. I'm going to just pick scratches, okay, because I want to make it look scratched up. And as I go over these, you can see all the different effects I'm getting. And I like this one here. This is the one I used in my preset. And the only thing I want to do is, I like this because it makes it look a little bit aged and almost a little beat up, which is fine. But it's a little too much. But I can tweak it because I can mask things out. So we already covered some of this other stuff like the opacity, and in my next example I'll show you how we use color, strength, and color. But what I want to show you is the masking. So all these layers that you're putting in here, each one you can mask out the effects separately just by clicking on one of these. So spot is sort of like a vignetting mask, but I want to selectively brush out, so I'm going to use the brush. Now those of you not that familiar with masks, black conceals and white reveals. So right now the whole mask is blank, there's nothing there, it's essentially like a white mask, so it's showing everything. I'm going to make sure I'm clicked on the black here, and I'll leave the strength where it is. I'm going to bring my brush size down a little bit because I just basically want to take out some of these scratches. Hardness is probably okay where it is. So I'm just going to selectively get rid of some of these like big scrapes and anything that might be a little bit distracting in my image here. For instance, there's one running right through the hay bale here. There's these big scrapes, another one running right through a hay bale there. So this is pretty cool. I still have this nice look of the sort of the scratch, like a not perfectly preserved ambrotype here, but I can selectively go in and mask these out, and you can see it gives me a little miniature of my mask there. So the mask is all white except for the black brush strokes where I took out some of the scratches. So I think we're done. That looks great, and I'm going to say well, let me close this up so you can see all the layers. I might do one more thing here. Actually, I'm gonna add a basic adjustment just to show you. And this is just like it sounds, a basic adjustment. It has all the basics: brightness, shadows, highlights, etc. So what's happened is with all these layers and all these things I did to it, the image overall got a tiny bit dark. So I'm gonna bring up the brightness just a hair. I'm gonna bring up the highlights a little more to kind of get that a little bit more of that shiny look, and I might even bring the clarity up just a bit to add a tiny bit of depth to it. So not very much, a little bit subtle. If you want to see what I did, I can click that off, click it back on the basic adjustment. You can do a basic adjustment first too, and then just always go back and change it. So at any time I can, right here, I can go back into any of these layers and make changes if I want to. But I like the way this looks, so I'm going to say OK. And this should bring me back into Photoshop with the image processed into a layer. So there we are. That's before the texture effects. That's before black and white effects. So there's black and white effects, gives me a really great black and white to start. And then I added the texture effects to get sort of that aged and worn look of an ambrotype. And let me jump back into Lightroom here. And so here, let's just do a A/B comparison. And there we are. So there's where I started on the left with the color image that I originally shot with a black and white in mind. And then when texture effects came out, I decided I wanted to make an ambrotype out of it. So pretty cool. All right, I'm going to do another image now. We'll jump forward in time. I'm going to do something a little more modern. Let's start with this image here. So I shot this in New York City, not that it really matters, but it's a simple shot, and I think a simple shot like this is a great candidate for texture effects, mainly because of its simplicity. So I'm going to use another plugin that I really like before I go into texture effects, and that's Restyle. So I'm going to show you where I want to go with this. Here, let me make this a little bit bigger. So that's where I want to go with this. And although this looks like I did a ton of work on it, it's literally just 2 quick layers in texture effects. And I did start out in Restyle, and that was actually a quick jump into Restyle too. So let me go back to my original image here, and I'll show you how I did that. So I'm going to right-click this time, do Edit In. And again, I'm using more than one plugin, so I'm going to use Photoshop this time, so I have layers. So this brings me into Photoshop. I'm closing out that other one first. So I'm duplicating my layer. I'm going to relabel this Restyle. Now, those of you that have not seen Restyle, it is a very cool program. And I did a webinar a while back called Pure Fun with Topaz Plugins, and I sort of showcased Restyle in that one. But I'll show you again right now. So I'm going to go up to Filter, Topaz Labs, down to Restyle. Now, when Restyle comes up here, the best way I can explain, I'm going to reset this. The best way I can explain Restyle is that it gives you a very specific color palette and a limited color palette, and that's the beauty of the program. And it's based really all on presets, and then you can go in and change your presets. Now, I'll just go into one here, like for instance, graphic. And you notice it has all these color bars. And as I hover over, it'll show me the effect it's going to give, or I can do like I did before with the browse mode, and it gives me all these different things. So what it does, I've already got a limited color palette in this image to begin with, which is what I like about it. It's very simple, there are very few colors, but I want them to be more vivid. So let's say, for instance, I just want to select this one. I can click on it. I can make it a favorite by selecting the star. Now, because this is a preset oriented program and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, there's a really great search method in here. So you can go in and pick whatever category you want, including selecting all of them. You can type in keywords. You can look by your favorites. So if I want to see my favorites come up there. And I can go to a different category if I want. And the other thing is you can search on keywords. So let's say I just want stuff with blue in it. So I'll just click on the blue, and it should give me all the ones with blue. Or I can do red. So anything that's got red in it, again, I could do like I did before in the other one. I'll do black and white. And anyway, it'll filter those down. And I think what I'm going to do is just close this out, and I'll go into my collection, because I have one in here that I made from a photo that just had a yellow sweater and a purple purse strap and some brown hair. So that's this one down here called Yellow Sweater. Now, that's pretty electric. And remember, when you looked at this image, it looked like I did a whole ton of stuff to it. Here I am, one click, and I'm almost where I want to be with Restyle. It's just a little bit oversaturated. So I'm going to go over, again, the presets are on the right, collections and the individual presets on the bottom. Over on the right are my tools. And it's showing me the color palette. That's what these are. So these, the primary is the most dominant color, and it goes down to the least dominant color. And so you have this limited palette of 5 colors, and that's what makes Restyle so cool. It remaps the colors to just those colors. And in fact, you can create your own from an image. Like I said, I created this. Here, I'll even show you the image here. I created it from this image, and you can see those are the only colors in there: yellow, purple, and brown. So it's pretty cool. So now I can apply that palette to this image. So what I'm going to do is go to saturation. It's a little oversaturated. I'm going to try to bring these down. I'll bring them all down just a little bit. The only there. So I like that better. Now the only thing is I have these purple flowers. Those are a prominent thing, and you can see the 5th color is purple. So if I bring it all the way down, then I lose all the purple in those flowers. But I'm gonna boost it up quite a bit and make that purple really sing. So I'm going to click OK. I'm done with that. I wish I had more time to show you Restyle. It's a way cool program. So let me go back to Photoshop. So now it's saved off this layer. That's where we started. There's our Restyle layer. And I'm going to duplicate this one. And this is what I'm going to go into texture effects with. All right. Go up to filter again, down to Topaz Labs, whoops, down to texture effects. So now we're in texture effects, and it's defaulting back to the last thing, and I'm going to start from scratch here. So I'm going to hit reset, and I'm going to be able to do what I want to do with just 2 layers. So the first thing I want to do is add my texture. And what I wanted on this is I actually came up with this. I'll see if I can find it. Yeah, this kind of corrugated look. And I like this because it kind of makes the wall in the background look like instead of a stucco or concrete wall, that it's maybe more like one of those old corrugated metal buildings. And so I'm going to start there. Now, obviously, I can't use it just the way it is because it's going through my main subject, and it's going through the stone or brick, whatever that is on the bottom too. So I'm going to take care of all that. So the first thing I'm going to do is maybe bring the opacity down a little bit, just because the effect's a little too much. And again, you have to kind of play off this opacity and detail controls, because I can bring the detail way up or whatever. So I'm going to bring it up just a little bit. So that's going to give me maybe a little more texture. And I brought the opacity down, and I think that looks pretty good. But now I need to do some work on this with the mask to selectively get what I want out of this. So I'll bring the hardness up just a little bit on this brush. But the first thing I'm going to do is I just am going to completely brush out the effect on the bottom, because the bottom part is stone, and it doesn't look right to have stone corrugated. Now, of course, this is a very illustrative and somewhat abstract image. It's kind of funky, so it isn't too literal, but I still want to have a certain amount of logic to it, so to speak. I missed a little spot over here. I'm going to now go to a smaller brush for the flowers. I'll bring the strength down so to about 50% or so, so I can just kind of gradually brush that in. I'll bring down my brush size a bit, and I'm going to switch to my, not that you can see it, but I'm switching to my tablet because it's just easier to use a stylus for this type of thing. So I'm gonna zoom in just a little bit so that I can work on these flowers, and I'm at 50%, and what I'm doing is I'm masking out that texture in the background because I want it to look like a wall in the background. So I'm just kind of going over these main areas where the texture is kind of interfering with my main subject and brushing out that texture just so I can get that look back in here, all right? So I'll just go into these main areas, kind of quickly go over these and get that. And it doesn't have to be super precise. Again, this is just kind of an illustrative type of image, and it's pretty funky in general. So I mainly just want to make sure that I don't that the wall looks like it's behind it instead of running through it. So I think that's pretty good. I can, again, I'm at 50%, so I can brush in the effect more. These flowers up on top are kind of important, so I want to make sure I've done a good job with those and bringing those back. And you can see it all appearing on the mask there over on the lower left. While I'm doing this, you can watch your mask of what you've done come in. So I think that looks pretty good. Let me just shrink it back down to see. Yeah, and I like the look of that, so I'm going to say okay. Whoops, not yet. I want to do one more. I promised one more layer here. And what I want to point out is you can see, here's the before image. You can see there's very direct highlights on these flowers, so there's obviously some strong direction to the light that's hitting it. And now that we have this sort of pseudo corrugated metal background there, even if it wasn't metal, it's still painted, and there should be some kind of indication of the light source on it. So I'm going to do what is going to look like more like the sun being reflected off of it, so we have some reason for the direction of that light. So I'm going to use this one called light leak. All right. And the same deal. You can just, as I hover over these, I get all these different effects, and I get them instantly. It's pretty cool how it works. So that one's not bad there. Let's see what else we have. I like that one too. It's sort of a spotlight. Now again, it's a little too much, but I can use some controls to tweak it. And I told you I'd show you eventually get through more of these controls. So the first one I'm going to do, well, first of all, I'm going to bring up the opacity at least temporarily, just so I can see my effect better. And I'm going to go to this move tool, and that allows you to move the whole layer essentially there. And so I'm going to move the sunspot so that it's in between, and I moved it up a little too, in between these two prominent flowers. Now it's still too much. It's washing over the whole thing, and I don't want it to be a light source. I'm trying to make it look as more like it's a reflected light source. So the next thing I'm going to do is go down here to the mask again, and this time I'm going to use this invert button. So now that's going to mask all of it out. It's masked the entire layer now, and I'm selectively going to brush it back in. So with this light leak, I'm going to bring the strength down, again around maybe 50%, so I can sort of gradually bring this back in, and then I'll just, whoops, I have to make sure I'm on white, because black conceals and white reveals, and we want to reveal it. So as I go over this and paint it back in, I'm painting back in that sunspot, and I can just kind of select the areas where it goes. And I think that's pretty good. It's a little intense, but remember I turned up the opacity, so now I can go back here and bring that back down to something a little more reasonable. So there we are. And now it gets the viewer's attention. It gets your eye to go to where those main flowers are, just because our eye tends to go to the brightest thing in the image. But I don't want it to be brighter than the flowers. I just want to just have it be kind of a background thing so that we have a reason for that light source. I'm going to say, okay, I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out. And there you go. That only took a few minutes, 2 plugins, and if you take away my explanation time, it was literally just probably 4 or 5 minutes to do this thing. Okay, so there's the restyle stage, and there's the texture effects stage. I can save that off, and it'll save it back to Lightroom. And let me bring my... Okay, so there's the one I just did, and I'll compare them. And let me make them a little bigger, and there you are. Voila. The one on the left is where we started. Sorry, the one on the right is where we started. The one on the left is where we finished. Pretty awesome, I think, and it really didn't take much to give it that look. Now I'm going to let's see. I'm going to try to squeeze one more in here because I want to hop to another place in time and show you how I do a Polaroid transfer look. I started photography in the 70s, and that's kind of the era I associate with Polaroid transfers, and I think that's when they kind of became pretty popular. People are still doing them, but this is the image I'm going to start with, and where I want to end up is something like this. And a Polaroid transfer, for those who don't know, is using Polaroid film. As you just let it develop for a little bit, you peel apart the negative in the print, and you take a brayer or some kind of squeegee and put it down on your paper, and then you usually put it in water or something like that, and then when it's done cooking, you peel it apart. And the cool thing about it is each one is unique. They're all different. Sometimes you get a big chunk of the image missing because the negative doesn't stick, or spots on it like you see here. And there's sort of this bluish color is kind of classic too for a lot of Polaroid transfers, but everyone looks different. So I'm going to show you how I got there. And what I'm going to do here is, remember I told you if you know you're only doing one plugin or you don't need the layers, you can go directly into it right from Lightroom here. I'm going to go right into texture effects. So there's my image. I'm gonna click new because I'm gonna start from scratch here. I'm gonna add a basic adjustment first just to do a couple little tweaks. I'm gonna make the image just a tad bit brighter. I'm gonna add a little clarity to give that mist a little depth. This right here is a valley that's below the town where I hold my Villages of Tuscany workshop, and I shot it really early in the morning, literally before the sun came up. And I think the mist and the muted colors here are a great basis for that look of a Polaroid transfer. I think these adjustments are fine. This is just, it's a basic adjustment. I can always, well, I'm going to do one more thing here. Since I shot it early in the morning, it's very cool light, very blue, and so I'm actually going to I want it to be a warm look, so I'm going to warm it up quite a bit. And I think that's a good starting point. Now I'm going to add a texture layer, and I'm going to go into a subcategory again. Let's do wash, and let's see what we have here. And so again, I'm ignoring color. I'm just kind of looking for texture. This is the one I want right here, and you can see it kind of. I'm ignoring the color right now because I'm going to reduce that, but I kind of want that blotchiness because Polaroid transfers are rarely perfect, and there's usually some kind of blotches in it because the negative doesn't transfer 100%. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these blotches a little bigger. So I'm going to bring that up, and I'm going to take the move tool, and I'm going to move it around a little bit there. I think that looks pretty good for the way I want it. And then I want to also take down the opacity because I'm just kind of looking for the blotches. And maybe, again, I'm playing off with the detail here, so I'm going to bring up the detail a little bit because I want to be able to see those there. I think that's good right there. And there's a lot of color to this, so I'm going to bring the saturation down just a bit. All right, well, I think that's good for my texture layer. And now I'm going to add a border because Polaroid transfers, you never get a clean border on it, so I want to kind of give it that look. And so for the borders, let's go to one of the subcategories here. Hazy sounds good. And let's see. Oh, actually, I like this one here. Okay, I'm ignoring the color. I know you're going to think this is weird, but you'll see what I'm going to do with it. So I don't really need that red color, but what I'm going to do is increase the size. And because these things are rarely symmetrical, I'm going to take the move tool and just kind of limit the borders to just mainly the top and the right. And then I'm also going to increase the detail on this so I can see it better. However, the saturation I'm going to bring down because I don't want that red color. I mainly just want the texture there. But as far as color goes, remember I said you kind of that aqua color is kind of, I think is kind of reminiscent, or at least it reminds me of Polaroid Transfer. So I'm going to show you what these last two controls do down here. So I can set a color, and then color strength is it's going to add it to my effect as I bring up the strength. So you see if I bring it up all the way, it's a little too neon, but I'm going to bring it down maybe somewhere in this range to give it that kind of classic Polaroid bluish effect. So now the last thing I really need to do is just add some kind of blotchiness and scratches to it. So I'll do another adjustment layer. Let's see. Let's do scratches. And again, I can limit it to just scratches. And then I can go through, and this is the one I want right here. Now the only other thing I have left to do is just to selectively brush some of those out because I like the look of that. I'm going to give it that same aqua look. So there's my aqua color on the slider. I'm going to bring the strength up almost all the way. And that's really looking a lot like a Polaroid Transfer now. And the thing is these blotches, some of them are blocking my image. So I'm going to, and this is what's great about the masking is I can, this is kind of an important part of the image. You couldn't do this with a real Polaroid Transfer. You'd be stuck with what you get. But I have the luxury of this being digital and all these tools I have in texture effects to kind of reveal stuff that I think is an important part of the image. So I'm just kind of going through here and selectively, I'll take out that one little blotch right there. I have plenty of blotches in there. So I think that's good. I'm just going to say okay. And this will bring me back into Photoshop. Well, oh, that's right. I did this one in just in Lightroom. So there it is in Lightroom. It's saying loading, so I'll show you the one I did before just to compare these two. It's similar, whoops, wrong one, similar enough you get the idea. I'll compare these two, and there you are, voila. And I will also upload this one later so you guys can use this Polaroid Transfer effect too. I'll use that Topaz community to share it when we're done with the webinar. All right, I know we want to do questions. I'm going to show you something really quick. That's this one, this image right here. And the reason I'm showing you this is to show you how easy it can be to make a really great image with texture effects. So this is just an image I shot in France when I was scouting for a workshop that I conducted there in Provence, and found this cool tiled stairway with this funky colored rail. And it's just kind of a nice little graphic image, but I think it needs a little more punch. So I'm going to go into texture effects, and I'll show you what I did with this just to show you how powerful this thing can be. So I was going through this, and I always play with the presets first because sometimes that can do it right there. And I found this one called Color Burst over on the right under Featured. Boom, it's done. And I actually went in and played with the controls, and I could not improve it. This is exactly what I had in mind to do something really cool with this image. And you know what? While I'm in here, let me go to my effects, and I am going to upload that Polaroid Transfer right now so that you guys can use that one too. All right. So I'm going to go back to the featured. I'm going to leave this color burst. I'm going to say okay, and that's how easy it is. There's going to be plenty of times where you can just find the right preset and just boom, like that, one click and you're done.
Thank you so much for covering all of that.
Oh, you're most welcome.
Okay. If you want to follow Joel and check out some of his additional educational resources and imagery, you can go to his website at joelwolfson.com. And he also has a great blog, joelwolfson.com/blog, so you can follow him there as well. If you have any questions, you can contact us at webinars@topazlabs.com. And if you want to sign up for an upcoming session, we have another session next week. You can sign up at topazlabs.com/webinars. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you again, Joel.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, everybody, for joining.
Yes, have a great evening, afternoon, weekend, everything. We'll be talking to you next week. Bye-bye.